Expanded legal team, which now includes Johnnie Cochran.
Johnnie Cochran was a hero to the LA black community because he had spent decades exposing police misconduct in the treatment of African Americans.
The eyes of the world are focused here in Los Angeles, where the much-anticipated murder trial of O.J. Simpson is about to begin.
That trail of blood through his own Ford Bronco and into his house in Rockingham is devastating proof of his guilt.
Clark showed the jurors pictures of the death scene, bloody footprints, the knit cap, one of the bloody gloves.
The fact that blood mysteriously appears on vital pieces of evidence is devastating evidence of something far more sinister.
The notion that the Los Angeles Police Department would unfairly treat an African-American suspect in 1994 was far from outlandish, and no one knew that better than Johnnie Cochran.
Can you please describe the appearance of the glove, sir?
A dark leather glove. It appeared to be somewhat moist or sticky.
We knew early on that Detective Furman had issues in his background.
And you say on your oath that you have not spoken about black people as niggers in the past 10 years.
That's what I'm saying, sir.
The O.J. Simpson trial is in chaos tonight, and today's free-for-all could very well decide the ultimate outcome.
The Furman tapes, a ticking time bomb in the Simpson trial, blew up today.
It becomes evident late in the trial that Mark Furman has worked with a LA screenwriter and made tapes of what police life is like.
The defense offered 41 examples of Furman using the word something he swore on the witness stand he has not done in the last 10 years.
The defense wants desperately to prove that Furman is capable of manufacturing evidence to bolster their claim that he planted the bloody glove found at O.J. Simpson's estate.
All right, Detective Furman, would you resume the witness stand, please?
Was the testimony that you gave at the preliminary hearing in this case completely truthful?
I wish to assert my Fifth Amendment privilege.
The defense tried successfully to turn this case into a referendum on Mark Furman in particular and the LAPD in general.
Absolutely no one would have predicted it. After a trial that has lasted 3/4 of a year, the jury in the O.J. Simpson trial has taken less than 4 hours to reach a verdict.
All right, Mr. Cochran, Mr. Simpson, would you please stand and face the jury?
Most people can tell you where they were sitting when that verdict came down.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant Orenthal James Simpson not guilty of the crime of murder in violation of Penal Code Section 187A, a felony upon Nicole Brown Simpson, a human being, as charged in count 1 of the information.
The question wasn't whether O.J. was guilty or innocent. The question was whether the jury had been convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that the prosecution had sustained its burden. And at the end, they decided they had not.
Nobody is celebrating the fact that this horrific crime occurred. They're celebrating what feels like payback for Rodney King, even for Latasha Harlins, for a system and for conditions that have just ignored them.
O.J. is innocent! Free as a bird!
In recent weeks, every one of us has been made aware of a simple truth. White Americans and black Americans often see the same world in drastically different ways. Ways that go beyond and beneath the Simpson trial and its aftermath, which brought these perceptions so starkly into the open. Almost 30 years ago, Dr. Martin Luther King took his last march in Memphis. Well, today's march is about black men taking renewed responsibility for themselves, their families, and their communities.
Welcome to the Million Man March!
There are big goings-on in the nation's capital today. This is an enormous crowd of black American men and boys, and yes, even some women.
I remember the power of stepping out of the D.C. Metro and seeing this sea of faces of color on the National Mall.
The Million Man March was called for by Louis Farrakhan, who's head of the Nation of Islam.
The basic reason that this was called was for atonement and reconciliation.
He's always been a controversial figure because of his anti-Semitic utterances. But the march becomes bigger than Louis Farrakhan.
Why do we march? Because we're trapped with second-class schools and first-class jails.
We've been locked up. We've been brutalized. And this became the first mass expression we could make together, that we need to be regarded and respected and heal this racial breach.
We aren't all drug dealers and, around shooting each other and stuff like that. We can come together and have a positive message.
When you start standing with our mothers, when you stick it out with your families, when you start mentoring our young, then we can build a new nation of strong people.
I had to get out of that whole kind of like time bomb mentality that growing up in South Central LA gives you. So I think that the march gave me a sense of hope that things could get better.
Long live the spirit of the Million Man March! Long live the spirit of the Million Man March!
It was a show of force on the steps of New York City Hall. 10,000 off-duty cops banded together in protest, fed up and angry with a city they claim doesn't back them up.
Knock them all down!
David Dinkins pisses off the police because he talks about civilian review boards, he talks about accountability for police brutality, and so we see predominantly white police officers screaming overt racial slurs at the black mayor.
That kind of language, racial slurs, separate and apart from the destruction of property and whatnot, that is why some people have an absence of confidence in the police department.
The reason the morale of the police department is so low is one reason and one reason alone: David Dinkins!
In some ways, it was easy to blame David Dinkins for things that were not his fault. And along comes Giuliani with his pro-cop stance. There was an audience for this sort of message, as there often is.
Today, the New York police are being taught to take a very different tack, to clean up the neighborhood aggressively, to visibly improve the quality of life as a first step in crime reduction.
It's the broken windows theory, this idea that there were small quality of life crimes, and if you could stop that, you would set up a very peaceful and orderly society. And that really becomes a process of racial profiling that disproportionately targeted young black men as potential criminals.
We're out there. They have more foot posts out there, more police officers walking the beat.
Hi, how are you?
If I were to put police on every corner in America, of course crime would go down. But the question is, at what cost? For many black people, it was a sense of community, a sense of dignity, a sense of respect from law enforcement.
With the majority of Americans worrying about their quality of life in California, the easygoing tolerance of earlier decades has frayed.
At the ballot box, what we see in California, which is sort of the leading edge of this trend, is a whole number of different types of initiatives that are meant to further contain communities of color.
Tens of thousands of Californians marched through downtown Los Angeles today to demonstrate against Proposition 187, which would bar illegal immigrants from public schools, non-emergency medical services, and welfare rolls.
We are as American as anybody else, and we deserve an education.
Opponents say the emotionally divisive measure plays on voter prejudice against Latinos. But supporters say it will help staunch the flow of illegal immigrants to California.
It has become the issue in the governor's race. Pete Wilson is pinning his re-election hopes on anti-immigrant sentiment.
We are going to take back California for the working, tax-paying families of this state.
The main undercurrent of all of the different measures that were being held from 1994 onward dealt with fear of the other, of an expanding demographic.
It's that kind of incident that has generated so much heat in California, where there's a controversial ballot measure to end preference for minorities.
Proposition 209 would end all race and gender considerations in public education, government contracts, and hiring.
You begin to see all these policies and all these bills against affirmative action in attempting to address crime. And all of it feels like secret agent talk for black people.
There have been 376 murders so far this year. In Washington, many of them gang and drug related.
It's another night of gang violence in Los Angeles. 2 young men killed.
In Chicago, 8 people murdered since Friday. Violent crime is an issue that haunts the president and one he plans to address with new proposals next month.
You gave me this job, and we're making progress on the things you hired me to do. But unless we deal with the ravages of crime and drug and violence, none of the other things we seek to do will ever take us where we need to go.
The crime bill became lock 'em up, throw the key away, 3 strikes, you're out. And in their zest to govern, that we can stop this, it was an overreach.
In the bill,